It arrived without warning, without announcement, tucked between a pile of ordinary donations left by townspeople at the convent's entrance. Every few weeks a basket or two would appear by the gates, filled with odds and ends, flowers that had begun to wilt, letters from those seeking prayers, small heirlooms given out of guilt or gratitude. It was Sister Naomi's habit to help sort through these offerings at the end of her chores, her fingers moving deftly through cracked picture frames, water-stained hymnals, and boxes of worn rosaries. That afternoon was no different until she felt the unusual weight beneath a cluster of letters tied with twine. The Bible was not remarkable at first glance. Its cover was a deep, plain brown, its edges only slightly frayed, as though it had been handled with care. Yet, when Naomi lifted it, she noticed the subtle heaviness, the way the book seemed denser than others she had known. She turned it over in her hands, feeling the stubborn resistance of something hidden deep within the pages. The other sisters, bustling around her with baskets and boxes, barely glanced at it. Another Bible, they said with careless smiles. Another relic to place on the dusty library shelves among the hundreds already there. No one questioned its presence. No one looked closer. Only Naomi lingered, a soft sense of curiosity beginning to prick at the back of her mind. She carried it with her as the afternoon sun dipped lower, its gold light scattering through the high arched windows of the convent's old stone corridors. In the silence of her small, spare room, Naomi set the Bible down on her narrow cot, the worn mattress sighing under the weight. She looked at it for a long moment, feeling the odd instinct to leave it unopened, untouched. Something about the air around it seemed different, heavier, almost expectant. But practical habit and a lifetime of obedience pushed her forward. She ran her hand over the leather cover, noting the faint impressions where hands had once clutched it tightly and gently opened it. The pages inside smelled of dust and something older, something dry and metallic like the air before a thunderstorm. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Psalms, proverbs, familiar columns of sacred text written in neat, faded letters. But the more she turned the pages, the stronger the feeling grew that this was not simply another holy book misplaced. By time, she noticed small things. Pages slightly thicker than they should be, margins annotated in a hand that grew increasingly frantic and uneven toward the end. Names and dates she did not recognize, scribbled in between verses. A page near the center had been repaired with strips of yellowing tape, and beneath it, the faint outline of something tucked deep within the spine caught her eye. Outside her window, the bells rang the evening call to prayer, their echoes bouncing softly across the stone courtyard. She should have gone, should have left the Bible for another time. But her hands moved on their own, sliding carefully between the fragile pages, feeling the rough texture of parchment hidden between two chapters that, by all appearances, had fused together unnaturally. Her fingertips brushed it first, thin, dry, almost crackling under the pressure, and as she pried the pages apart, something fell into her lap with a whispering flutter, a folded parchment. Small, aged, brittle at the edges. Not the kind of insert one would find in a Bible meant only for prayer. Naomi froze, her heart stuttering in her chest. She stared at it for a long moment, the light from her small oil lamp catching the worn surface of the folded paper, revealing the faintest lines drawn upon it, curves, symbols, and notations that looked nothing like scripture. She did not open it right away. Instead, she simply sat there, hands trembling, the Bible now lying open and hollow on the bed, as if it had given up its last secret after years of silent waiting. The walls of her room seemed to press closer, the old wooden beams creaking faintly as if reacting to some shift she could not see. Somewhere deep in the convent's empty hallways, a door slammed without cause, the sound sharp and jarring against the thick silence. Naomi swallowed hard, feeling an invisible thread pulling her toward the parchment, a thread woven not by reason, but by something far older and more insistent. She should have gone to Mother Superior, should have confessed immediately that she had found something hidden. But a part of her, small and stubborn, wanted to see it first, wanted to understand what it was she had been given. Outside, night was falling fast, wrapping the convent grounds in a soft gray mist that blurred the stone walls and blackened the gardens. Naomi sat in the gathering twilight, the Bible gaping open beside her, the strange folded map cradled in her lap like a fragile, dangerous gift. For a long time, she did not move. She only stared at it, listening to the pulse of her own heartbeat in her ears, knowing without knowing that whatever she chose to do next, she would never again walk the halls of the convent as the same girl, who had once sorted through baskets of forgotten things without fear. The folded parchment sat on Sister Naomi's lap for what felt like an eternity before she finally gathered the courage to touch it again. Her fingers, steady from years of handling fragile relics and sacred texts, now trembled as they moved. She unfolded the paper slowly, careful not to tear its brittle seams, and as the creases gave way, the map revealed itself in full under the dim flicker of her oil lamp. It was hand-drawn. The ink faded and blurred in places, but the shapes were unmistakable. An intricate web of lines, crossroads, and symbols that formed a path leading into unknown places. There were no names of cities or towns she recognized, no markers of safe passage or pilgrim's rest. Instead, the route twisted and forked like veins through a pale expanse, with ominous symbols scattered along the way. A broken chalice, a weeping tree, a hollow cross drawn in heavy, urgent strokes. She traced the path with her eyes, then her fingertip, feeling an unsettling familiarity as if her body knew the way even if her mind did not. The parchment smelled faintly of old ash and iron, the scent clinging to her fingers as she touched it. In one corner of the map, cramped handwriting, in a language she could not decipher, twisted around itself like tangled roots. But she could feel the meaning humming beneath the words, a dark current threading through the fragile fibers of the page. It spoke not in clear language but in the oldest sense of warning, something ancient and utterly serious, something that had been hidden for a reason. A soft knock sounded in the hallway beyond her door. She froze, the map held tightly in her hands, and waited. The knock came again, soft, hesitant, and then faded into the sound of shuffling footsteps retreating down the corridor. Naomi pressed the parchment flat against the bedspread, the thin material of her habit doing little to muffle the paper's sharp crackle. A cold shiver ran down her spine. She knew she should hide it, bury it back between the pages of the Bible, pretend she had seen nothing. Yet her hands betrayed her, smoothing the map out, studying the lines more carefully. The center of the map was marked with a cross unlike any she had ever seen, jagged, broken, leaning sideways as though crushed under an invisible weight. Around it, thin lines radiated outward, almost like fractures in glass, suggesting a boundary or a scar in the earth. In small looping script beside it were two words she could barely read, the hollow cross. The name meant nothing to her, but it pulsed in her mind with a strange insistence, lodging itself somewhere deep inside her. The convent at night was a place of quiet devotion, but tonight the silence felt different. The air seemed heavier, almost dense, pressing against the stone. Walls and thick wooden doors. Naomi could hear it, the subtle difference in the way the wind moved through the cloisters, the nearly imperceptible crack of the old beams adjusting to a presence unseen. Her candle guttered briefly, casting tall, distorted shadows that danced across the stone floor. She quickly shielded the flame with her hand, heart hammering. She folded the map once more, this time along new creases, and tucked it into the inside pocket of her habit. It rested there against her heart, a thin and brittle weight that seemed to burn through the fabric. The Bible itself lay open and empty on her cot, its sacred pages exposed to the night like an abandoned shell. She stared at it, feeling a pang of guilt deep in her chest, as if she had desecrated something by removing the map. But another part of her, the part she barely understood, felt exhilaration. A door had opened. A path had been revealed, and even though she could not yet admit it to herself, a decision had already been made. She rose from the bed and crossed the room to the narrow wooden dresser that served as her only piece of furniture aside from the cot. From the bottom drawer, she pulled out a small journal, a gift from an older sister who had since passed away, and tucked the map carefully inside it. She pressed the journal closed, whispering a silent prayer without realizing it. Her hands lingered on the leather cover for a moment before she slid it back into the drawer and closed it firmly. Naomi turned back toward the window. Beyond the glass, the convent grounds were bathed in moonlight, the gardens silver and still. In the distance, the tall black silhouette of the old woods loomed against the sky, their spindly branches reaching upward like 1,000 pleading arms. Somewhere beyond those woods, she knew, the path on the map began. Somewhere beyond those trees, the hollow cross waited. The realization struck her with a quiet, terrifying clarity. The map was not meant to be found. Not by her. Perhaps not by anyone. And yet, it had come to her hands as if chosen. She could pretend she had never seen it, bury it back among the forgotten relics, speak of it to no one. But the map would remain. It would call to her. Already she felt its pull, like a thread wound tight around her chest, drawing her towards something hidden, something forbidden. The candle on her nightstand flickered again, the flame bowing low, as if to an unseen wind. Naomi crossed the room and extinguished it with a sharp breath, plunging herself into darkness. For a long time she stood there, eyes open, listening to the sound of the convent breathing around her, the creaks, the sighs, the low moan of old wood settling under the weight of unseen things. And somewhere in that breathing darkness, she thought she heard it again, the soft, unmistakable sound of parchment shifting, as if the map itself was moving, alive, waiting. She slipped into her narrow bed without undressing, the journal with the hidden map pressed beneath her pillow. Sleep would not come easily. When it did, it would bring dreams twisted with broken crosses and endless winding paths that led deep into the earth. Dreams seated by a map no one should ever have followed, planted now like a splinter in her soul. Days passed, but the map never truly left Sister Naomi's thoughts. It lingered behind every prayer, every whispered hymn, every quiet moment when the mind was supposed to be still. She would kneel with the other sisters during evening vespers, lips moving over the familiar words, yet her heart beat to a different rhythm, an anxious pulse that throbbed under her habit, reminding her of what she had hidden. Even as she scrubbed the convent floors or tended the wilting garden beds, her mind drifted back to the folds of the parchment tucked inside her journal, hidden in the bottom drawer of her dresser. She told herself it was foolishness, an old curiosity, a relic of no importance. But in the silent hours before dawn, when the world was wrapped in its thinnest veil, temptation crept in like a mist. At first, Naomi tried to ignore it. She buried herself in her chores, staying late in the kitchen to scrub pots until her fingers ached, volunteering to mend the others' habits even when her own needed repair. She sought out Sister Agnes for extra lessons in Scripture, her voice overly eager, her smile strained, anything to crowd out the thought of the map, anything to drown the low, persistent whisper that filled the back of her mind whenever she allowed herself a moment's rest. But despite her efforts, it grew stronger. It threaded itself into her dreams. She would find herself wandering endless stone corridors at night, chasing the sound of rustling parchment, only to wake drenched in cold sweat, her heart hammering wildly in the darkness. The convent itself seemed to change in those days. Familiar corridors felt longer. The shadows, deeper. Strange drafts slipped under closed doors, carrying scents Naomi could not place. Damp earth, singed wood, a sharp metallic tang like blood or iron. Whispers seemed to travel along the stones, just out of hearing, just beyond understanding. At night, she began to hear soft footsteps outside her room, slow and deliberate, as if someone, or something, was pacing back and forth. When she opened her door to look, the hallway was always empty, bathed in the same flickering candlelight. As before, the same worn tapestries and creaking floorboards. But she knew she was not imagining it. Something had shifted when she opened that Bible. Something had woken. One evening, as the other sisters gathered in the courtyard to tend the lanterns, Naomi slipped away under the pretense of fetching more oil. Her hands shook slightly as she pulled open her dresser drawer and retrieved the journal. It felt heavier now, as if the map inside had gained weight, had rooted itself deeper into her life. She opened the journal carefully, peeling back the soft leather cover to reveal the brittle folds of the parchment once more. Even without unfolding it, she could feel the path pressing against her, urging her to remember, to follow. She told herself it would be enough just to look at it again, just to remind herself of its emptiness, its absurdity. She spread it across her lap, smoothing out the old creases, and once more the strange symbols and twisting lines seemed almost to move under the wavering lamplight. Her eyes traced the path from the jagged starting point at the convent to the center, to the hollow cross marked with ominous finality. She noticed details she had missed before, small notations in the margins, faint arrows almost invisible. To the eye, paths that veered sharply away and ended in ominous stains of ink, as though the map itself had bled. The temptation was no longer subtle. It clawed at her. She thought of the legends whispered by the oldest sisters, of relics that carried curses, of objects that were hidden not to be protected, but to protect others from them. And yet, some part of her, a part that had always longed for more than the quiet walls of the convent, ached to know what lay at the end of that broken path. Was it a warning? A promise? A test? She could not say. But the thought of turning her back on it forever filled her with a hollow dread she could not explain. A gust of wind rattled the window panes, and Naomi startled, instinctively folding the map and stuffing it back into her journal. She pressed the book to her chest, heart pounding as if she had been caught in the midst of a theft. Outside, the sky had darkened to a bruised purple, the last fingers of sunlight clawing desperately. At the horizon, she rose from her cot slowly, her legs trembling beneath her. She placed the journal back in the drawer and closed it gently, the click of wood on wood sounding louder than it should have in the stillness. Standing there in the gathering gloom, Naomi realized something with a clarity that struck deep. It was no longer a question of if she would follow the map. It was only a question of when. The temptation had taken root, wrapping itself around her soul like a vine. She would resist a little longer, pretend a little harder, but the outcome had already been sealed the moment she unfolded the parchment. That night, as she lay in her narrow bed, the map hidden once again beneath layers of ordinary life, she stared up at the cracked plaster ceiling and listened to the house settle around her. In the rhythm of the creaks and sighs, she could almost hear it calling, soft and insistent, pulling her toward a path she knew she could never walk away from. The morning Naomi chose to leave broke over the convent in a heavy, reluctant dawn. The sky was a washed-out gray, neither stormy nor clear, as if the heavens themselves could not commit to blessing or cursing what was about to unfold. The bells tolled faintly in the distance for lauds, but Naomi did not join the procession of sisters shuffling in their habits toward the chapel. Instead, she remained in the shadowed edges of the corridor, waiting for the footsteps to fade, for the last murmured prayer to echo into silence. She had dressed plainly, tucking the map into the deep pocket of her habit where it rested, warm against her side, like a living thing. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with a terrible certainty. Today, the path would be walked. She slipped through the convent gardens with her head bowed low, moving past the rows of withered roses and crooked statues of saints whose faces seemed to watch her with silent, crumbling judgment. The garden gate creaked as she pushed it open, the iron cold and rough against her palm. Beyond it stretched the old road, barely more than a narrow track these days, winding into the low mist that clung stubbornly to the fields and woods beyond. She had memorized the first part of the map by heart, committing every faded symbol and twisting line to memory during those sleepless nights. The gravel crunched softly under her boots as she crossed into the world beyond the convent's walls, and with every step, the weight of her decision pressed heavier against her shoulders. The road soon gave way to fields gone fallow, the tall grasses whispering secrets in the slow, chill wind. Here and there stood the skeletal remains of abandoned farmhouses, their windows gaping like hollow eyes. Naomi kept her gaze fixed ahead, the path in her mind guiding her toward a thin line of trees that rose on the horizon like a dark scar across the land. As she entered the woods, the light dimmed further, the trees growing close and tangled above her, their bare branches scratching against one another in soft, brittle protests. The path beneath her feet narrowed, becoming little more than a deer trail, muddy and treacherous. Her habit caught on thorny undergrowth, tearing slightly at the hem, but she pressed on, ignoring the sting of scratches blooming across her calves and hands. The map's memory pulled her forward with quiet insistence, every step deeper into silence. Hours seemed to pass without measure. The forest pressed around her, swallowing sound and light alike. Only the occasional call of a crow overhead or the rustle of unseen creatures in the underbrush broke the oppressive quiet. Naomi found herself muttering prayers under her breath, prayers she had learned as a child, their familiar rhythms grounding her against the growing feeling that she was walking into a place long abandoned by God. She checked the map once, twice, tracing the faint landmarks, a leaning oak tree split by lightning, a shallow creek that ran black with silt. Each appeared before her, as if the map had not merely predicted them, but summoned them into being. The deeper she went, the stranger the world around her became. Trees stood in impossible shapes, twisted and gnarled, their bark scarred with deep, unnatural marks. Stones rose from the earth in crude, deliberate piles, forming crude altars to forgotten things. The air grew colder despite the season, and Naomi found herself wrapping her arms around her chest, shivering not just from cold, but from something more primal, an instinctive recognition of wrongness that no amount of faith or reason could explain away. At last, she reached a clearing, a hollow where even the birds dared not sing. In the center of it stood the hollow cross. It was larger than she had imagined, rising from the earth in a broken spire of stone and rot. Time and the elements had ravaged it, splitting it nearly in half, leaving jagged edges like teeth against the dull sky. Around its base, the ground was scorched and cracked, as if something terrible had once burst forth from the soil. Naomi stood at the edge of the clearing, her breath catching in her throat, her body refusing to move closer. The map burned hot against her side, an urgent reminder of how far she had come, how impossible it would be to turn back now. She stepped forward, each pace slower than the last, the air growing heavier, harder to breathe. The ground beneath her, boots, felt unstable, as if hollow, thin over some deeper void. She reached the foot of the hollow cross and knelt instinctively, not in reverence, but in exhaustion, in terror. Up close, she could see faint carvings along the stones, symbols that made her skin crawl, ancient letters that shifted when she tried to focus on them. The map had led her here, but it had not told her what to do next. As she knelt there, the wind picked up, swirling dust and dead leaves into chaotic dances around her. The trees at the edge of the clearing groaned under invisible weight, and for a moment Naomi thought she saw shapes moving between them. Tall, gaunt figures that watched but did not approach. Her heart hammered painfully against her ribs. She clutched the map through the fabric of her habit, feeling its heat pulse in time with her own panicked heartbeat. The sky above dimmed further, clouds pressing low and thick, cutting off the pale sunlight that had barely filtered through. Naomi closed her eyes and pressed her forehead to the cold, cracked earth at the foot of the hollow cross, praying without words, without thought, only pure instinct. She prayed for strength. She prayed for forgiveness. But most of all, she prayed for an answer to a question she could not even fully form, a question that had driven her from the safety of the convent into the jaws of something ancient and waiting. When she finally lifted her head, the world around her felt subtly different, as if the clearing itself had taken a breath and now held it, waiting. Naomi rose slowly, the dust of the ruined earth clinging to her hands and knees. She turned once, looking back toward the path that had brought her here, but the woods had shifted, the trail lost among the tangle of blackened trees. There was no path back, only forward, only deeper. The first crack came not from the earth, but from the air itself, a soundless fracture, a shift so deep that it seemed to tug at the fabric of reality around Naomi, warping the space she stood in. She felt it before she heard it, a sudden weight pressing down on her shoulders, a coldness that soaked through, her skin into her bones. Her breath caught in her throat. The hollow cross loomed before her, larger, darker, as if it had absorbed the dim light of the clearing into itself. The stones vibrated subtly under her feet, pulsing in slow, deliberate intervals, as if the monument were a great heart awakening from a long, bitter sleep. Naomi staggered backward, instinctively raising a trembling hand to shield herself from something unseen. The ground beneath her boots trembled, a deep, groaning shudder that rippled outward from the base of the broken monument. Dust lifted from the cracked soil, spinning in slow, spiraling columns that rose into the thickening gloom above. From the corners of the clearing, the shapes she had glimpsed before began to move. Not rushing, not attacking, but slowly drifting closer, like shadows untethered from any source of light. She realized with a hollow pang of dread that she had triggered something. The map had not been a guide to a treasure, nor a lost relic of pilgrimage. It had been a key, a lure, a summons. And she had answered it without question, without hesitation, led by a compulsion that now revealed itself for what it truly was. A trap carefully laid long before her birth, baited with curiosity, sealed with innocence. The wind rose into a high, keening wail, and the pressure around her intensified until it felt as if invisible hands were pressing against her chest, her throat, her temples. Naomi fell to her knees again, clutching at the earth, the map forgotten and crumpled at her side. Her mind reeled, assaulted by flashes of impossible visions, cities burning under blackened skies, rivers running backward, towering figures moving through broken landscapes where no sun rose. She saw herself among them, wandering lost, her habit tattered, her hands empty, her voice swallowed by a silence that knew no end. Tears blurred her vision, but she could not look away. The hollow cross pulsed again, a rhythmic surge that seemed to draw her forward even as her body rebelled. From its broken center, a thin mist began to rise, thick, oily, and shimmering faintly with colors no human eye was meant to perceive. The mist slithered toward her, reaching out in tendrils that coiled around her ankles, her wrists, tugging at her with a touch that was neither hot nor cold, but profoundly wrong. She tried to pray, forcing the familiar words from her lips, but they disintegrated the moment they left her mouth, swallowed whole by the oppressive air. Her faith, her training, her years of devotion, none of it mattered here. Here, only the oldest truths held sway, truths carved into the bones of the world long before any convent had been built, before the first scripture had ever been written. The figures at the edge of the clearing halted, their forms clearer now, tall, gaunt beings draped in robes that seemed woven from the night itself. Their faces were hidden beneath deep hoods, but Naomi could feel their attention, sharp and invasive, peeling back her thoughts, her memories, her fears. They stood as silent witnesses to her trespass, judges at a trial whose outcome had been decided long ago. The ground cracked beneath the hollow cross with a sudden, deafening roar, and from the split emerged a blinding light, not pure, not holy, but a sterile, searing brightness that exposed everything, every flaw, every doubt, every hidden sin she had ever harbored. Naomi screamed, though no sound escaped. Her throat. She clutched at her chest, feeling her heartbeat falter under the weight of revelation, of punishment. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the tremors ceased. The mist retreated, curling back into the broken stones. The light dimmed, leaving after-images burning against the backs of her eyes. The clearing fell silent once more, save for the shallow, ragged sound of her breathing. The robed figures melted into the forest without a word, their verdict unspoken, but final. Naomi lay crumpled at the foot of the hollow cross, her body shaking uncontrollably. When she finally found the strength to move, she crawled forward and saw what the cross had birthed from its cracked center, a single object resting in the churned earth. It was not gold or jewels, not sacred relics or forbidden knowledge. It was a shard of bone, long and slender, carved with the same symbols that had marked the stones and the map. It pulsed faintly with an inner light, a heartbeat that matched her own. She reached for it with trembling hands, compelled beyond reason, beyond fear. As her fingers closed around the shard, a new mark seared itself into her palm. A burning brand she could not see but could feel, etched into her very being. It carried no pain, only a deep, resounding certainty that she had been claimed, marked by forces she could neither name nor defy. Naomi stumbled to her feet, the bone shard clutched tightly in her hand, and turned away from the hollow cross. The path she had come by was gone, swallowed by the restless, shifting woods. There would be no easy return. The journey back would be longer, harder, and shadowed by what she had awakened. The consequences of her choice had begun to unfold, and deep within the silent convent she had left behind, unseen doors began to creak open, releasing things that had slumbered too long in the dark. Naomi stumbled through the forest, her legs weak beneath her, every step a labor against the cold weight that had settled into her bones. The shard she had taken pulsed faintly in her clenched hand, sending irregular tremors up her arm, but she could not bring herself to let it go. The woods around her seemed darker now, the trees packed closer together, their limbs gnarled and twisted as if straining toward her with skeletal fingers. Paths she had followed before no longer existed. The landmarks she had carefully memorized had faded into a landscape of sameness and shadow, and she realized with a slow dread that she was being guided, not by memory, but by the will of something, far greater and far older than herself. The sun had long vanished behind a heavy blanket of clouds, casting the world into a perpetual dusk. Naomi pressed onward, driven not by any hope of return but by an instinctive need to escape the place she had awoken. The forest floor, once firm and rough with roots and stones, had turned soft and spongy underfoot, as though the earth itself had begun to rot. Strange murmurs rose from unseen places, the voices too garbled to understand but filled with an unmistakable urgency, a clamor of warnings she was too far gone to heed. When the convent finally appeared through the thinning trees, Naomi almost wept. The familiar outline of the bell tower jutted against the bruised sky like a promise of safety. She stumbled forward, the last of her strength bleeding away, her battered body moving on pure will. The stone walls loomed closer, their once welcoming warmth now seeming foreign, even hostile. She pressed her hand against the cold iron gate, and it groaned open under her touch, swinging inward as though reluctant to admit her. The courtyard was empty. No soft chatter of sisters in prayer, no echo of footsteps on stone. Only silence greeted her, heavy and thick as oil. Naomi crossed the threshold with dragging steps, her habit torn and filthy, her face pale under the weight of everything she had seen. She moved through the familiar halls, their outlines blurring at the edges of her vision. Every portrait, every carved lintel, every stone seemed subtly altered, as if the world she had left behind had been twisted while she was gone. she found the sisters gathered in the chapel, standing in rigid, unnatural stillness. Their faces turned toward her as one, blank and empty, their eyes dark and hollow as if something had drained all color and light from within them. Naomi froze at the doorway, her heart hammering wildly. The air inside the chapel buzzed with an unseen energy, thick and oppressive, like the static before a storm. She clutched the shard tighter, feeling it sear her skin, the pain sharp but anchoring. The Mother Superior stepped forward, but it was not the woman Naomi remembered. Her face was pale, almost translucent, and her smile was a thin, brittle thing stretched too tightly across her cheeks. She extended her hand slowly, palm up, and Naomi understood instinctively that they had been waiting for her. Not with joy, not with anger, but with a terrible expectation, as if she were the missing piece to a ritual that had been unfinished for too long. The map had not led her astray. It had led her exactly where it intended. She was not the first to follow its path, nor would she be the last. The revelation unfolded inside her mind like a poisoned flower. The Bible had been planted, a trap set for whoever was desperate or curious enough to take the bait. The convent itself had once been a place of sanctuary, but over the years its walls had thinned, its protections eroded. Now it stood hollow, a shell inhabited not by the faithful, but by something else, something that wore their faces like masks. Naomi's legs buckled and she fell to her knees on the cold stone floor. The shard in her hand flared brightly, and in its light she saw visions flickering at the edges of her vision, visions of countless others before her, kneeling in the same spot, clutching the same cursed artifact, their fates sealed by the same insatiable hunger that had drawn them here. She was merely another chapter in a story that had begun long before her, a story that would continue long after her bones had turned to dust. The sisters began to chant, a low, droning hum that vibrated in the stones, in Naomi's teeth, in the blood thrumming through her veins. She tried to rise, but her body refused to obey. She was bound now, tied not by ropes, but by the invisible tendrils of whatever ancient covenant she had stumbled into. The Mother Superior knelt before her, still, smiling that terrible smile, and placed her icy hand upon Naomi's forehead. In that moment, Naomi saw everything. She saw the hollow cross as it once was, a monument to a pact made in desperation during a time of unspeakable horror. She saw the first guardians, the ones who had built the convent not as a sanctuary for the pure, but as a prison for the impure, a mask over the rot. She saw the endless cycle of sacrifice and corruption, each generation feeding the next, each innocent soul twisted into another link in a chain that stretched beyond memory. And she saw herself, not as a victim, but as anointed, chosen by her own weakness, her own hunger for something beyond the walls she had once trusted to keep her safe. The shard's light faded, and Naomi's vision dimmed with it. As the darkness closed in, she felt herself slipping, not into death, but into a different kind of existence, one where time meant nothing, where identity dissolved into purpose, and where her voice would one day join the endless, whispering chorus calling out from behind the hollow cross. When she was finally still, the sisters lifted her gently, reverently, carrying her deeper into the chapel where the oldest stones remembered names long forgotten by the living. Behind them, the wind rose, rattling the windows in a mournful howl, as if mourning a soul already lost. But no one came to mourn Naomi. In time, the Bible would find its way to another donation table, another convent, another pair of trembling hands drawn to its hidden weight, and the map would unfold again, as it always had, as it always would.